You know, there comes a time in every man's life when he has to say, so what's the point? I mean, what's this all been working towards? No, I mean Katamari Damacy. What's the point? Well, that's the thing. There's no point in doing anything. And especially not games. Well, for the most part. Unless you're a gaming god. Or just really hecking funny.
Hello everybody, my name is...
For most, games are just a simple time waster. A way to unwind and maybe chill with some friends. That's what I thought until one of my friends asked me, so what's the point of Katamari? To which I told him, oh, it's a cool game where you roll stuff up. And he says, oh, that's it? Seems kind of like a waste of time. And let me tell you, that didn't sit right with me. Are we talking about the same thing? At its core, Katamari is a game about rolling up tiny objects on a sticky ball until you eventually roll up enough shit to become bigger. Then what do? You roll up even bigger shit, and loop forever. That's the game. At least on the surface. But Katamari is a lot more than that. In fact, most games are a lot more than what they appear to be on the surface. It goes to say that Katamari is a whole experience. It's about the music, it's about the atmosphere, it's about the pizzazz.
Yeah, sure, but where's the pizzazz?
Anyways, this whole video is kind of just me talking about why I love Katamari. Why we love Katamari. So let's get into it, shall we? The Katamari series is a whole franchise, and while I'm going to briefly go over its history, this video is mainly going to be talking about the first game and its remake. Although, that's probably fine, because overall, the series has not changed drastically since its launch. The series began life on the PlayStation 2 console with the first release, Katamari Damacy, which was developed and published by Namco in 2004. At the heart of this series is a man named Keita Takahashi, who created the original designs for the Katamari series as a side project while working on a racing game, that eventually got dropped overall. This game was developed by Takahashi as part of the Namco Digital Hollywood Game Laboratory, a sponsored institute for game development education. Of note is that Katamari was created on a budget about the equivalent of $1 million US, a low number compared to other Namco titles at the time, and in fact it almost nearly didn't happen, as Takahashi himself claims that during an interview, the higher-ups in Namco didn't like him. However, the artists loved him, and one of them convinced corporate to take a shot at him in hopes that they could create an interesting game. Taking a look at the game, I think it's safe to say that Takahashi and Namco blew that goal right out of the park. Katamari was released and sold for 2/3 the price of a new PlayStation 2 game, a decision which no doubt helped boost sales. Eventually, developers at GDC caught wind of the game, and Takahashi was asked to appear at the Experimental Gameplay Workshop at GDC 2003. Audiences were amazed about the game's visuals and gameplay, how it was so simple yet captivating. However, they were sad to hear that Katamari wouldn't be getting a stateside release, at least until Namco realized that there was an actual buzz about this game, and they just might have something good on their hands. And so, Katamari was released in the United States for less than half the price of a full game. Not bad for a game released on a tenth of the budget of other Namco titles. As for why Katamari is the way it is, Takahashi was an art student at the time, who decided that he wanted to create something new. He had become tired of his perceived violent nature of video games, and he wanted to create something new that didn't rely on violence in order to have fun. Takahashi made enjoyment one of the key elements of the game. In fact, when developers requested that the game be made more difficult, Takahashi adamantly disagreed, as this presumably was not part of his vision for Katamari Damacy. But just what was it about this quirky side project from Japan that audiences loved? This game is a blast to look at visually, especially if you're into the whole quirky Japanese aesthetic. Well, let me explain. Japan in this game exists in some made-up bizarro world where people just leave random shit lying around everywhere. There are also sentient objects, human-sized versions of animals that shouldn't be human-sized, and in general, everything's more than a little off. Hey, what the hell's going on here? To say this game is a little weird might be an understatement. And at a glance, this might be one of the things that can turn newcomers off to the franchise. However, if you can tolerate the aesthetic, what you are left with is a quirky game about a really enigmatic version of Japan. This game is unapologetically Japanese, and I love it. For example, the first map has us rolling through a quaint little Japanese house that is just littered of junk and knickknacks that a person's house might have had in the early 2000s. And personally, this aspect of the game makes me feel a certain sense of nostalgia for simpler times gone by. Items we might find include things such as a boombox, pachinko balls, batteries, hankos, Japanese signature stamps used to mark official documents, a grand opening sign. This style of sign is seldom seen outside of Japan, and this video game console, which I'm pretty sure never existed, but its color scheme resembles that of an American NES combined with an Atari 2600. To put it simply, I would consider a lot of the items and objects in Katamari as a form of eye candy. eye candy is something intended to be attractive to the eye without being demanding or contributing anything essential, then I would say Katamari has this down to a T, but we'll touch more on this later. If you break down any Katamari level, it has layers to where you can go. There's progression, and other than the time limit, the only limit is how good you are. Anywhere you can see on a map, you can pretty much go. You just might not be big enough. Yeah, good. Maybe you're too big and you missed out a certain part of a level. Better come back here next time and be less good. That's built-in replayability, I reckon. Katamari is the type of game I could just boot up and roll around admiring the level design. Most maps aren't too big or overly detailed, but they tell a story. This one says manic behavior. Some of my favorite things going on in the background include this man riding what appears to be a panda vehicle hybrid. Absolutely everyone and their mom rocking pompadours. This man riding a vehicle made of dumbbells. Our dad calling our cousins weird, and whatever this is. Seem weird? What if I told you that all those examples are all found on the same level? Indeed, there's some weird shit going on in Katamari Damacy. And there are a lot more examples of this. So many that we could make a whole video about it. But for now, let's move on to the sound design. The soundtrack to Katamari Damacy took a lot of inspiration from a genre known as Shibuya-kei, a subgenre of pop music that emerged in Japan around the late 1990s. Shibuya-kei itself draws from mainstream J-pop with a mix of jazz, soul, and lounge influences. At the front of the Katamari soundtrack was Yu Miyake, with whom Keita Takahashi created a video project called Texas 2000. During the creation of this project, Takahashi was so impressed he gave him full reign as sound director of Katamari Damacy. At the helm, Miyake set out to create a soundtrack that featured music from well-known artists who had been out of the spotlight at the time, along with a team of various composers, one of which was actually Keita Takahashi's wife, Asuka Sakai, who played piano. Miyake's main goal was to create music that was familiar, yet not trendy, in order to give Katamari the best chance of standing the test of time. The final result of the Katamari soundtrack was met with good reception, and audiences loved the soundtrack's catchiness and quirkiness. In fact, the soundtrack was so good that it even won both IGN and GameSpot's Soundtrack of the Year 2004 awards. Oh no way, you too? My favorite song for the first game is Lonely Rolling Star. It has this upbeat vibe, a little playful and cheery, you know? But when you look into it, the lyrics are a little sad. It's about a woman longing for her lover, who is rolling at Katamari and has not yet come back. This gets to me, man. Fuck. I hope he comes back one day. Sorry. Most of these songs, if not all of them, are what I would describe as being quirky. Quirky and unapologetically Japanese. That's the name of the game for Katamari Damacy. Overall, if I had to describe the music in this game, it just makes me want to keep going. It's music to roll stuff up to, you know? I am convinced the soundtrack of this game can cure depression, or at least help a little. In addition, I love the sounds that play whenever one rolls up an object. Not only is it pleasing, but it helps serve as a form of confirmation that the object is actually attached to your Katamari. Most items have a unique jingle attached to them. And while we're on the subject of sound design, how could we overlook the king of all cosmos? One of the first things newcomers to this series might notice is that this guy talks in record scratches. That's just amazing. Doesn't add a whole lot, but I like it. We've talked about the overall presentation. Now let's get on to the meat of this bad boy, shall we? At its core, the gameplay in Katamari revolves around controlling a sticky ball, known as a Katamari, and you play as this little guy. That's a prince. He's small. Basically, your dad is the king of all cosmos, and he made a whoopsie. So being his son, he sends you to Earth to help undo his whoopsie by rolling stuff up to form a planet. Or a couple hundred. You know, just a typical Tuesday. The king of all cosmos is at the center of most of our misadventures in this series. In fact, in the first game, at least in the Japanese version, it is explained that we are fixing his mistakes due to a drunken stupor which he had the night before. But that's probably fine, because in the king's own words, we owe him for our existence, and he is simply collecting on that debt. Make no mistake, between his lack of care, talking in broken record scratches, and being overly picky about our progress while seemingly having no self-awareness for himself, the king is a deadbeat dad, but he's our lovable deadbeat dad. And our progress in this game hinges on whether or not he is satisfied with the size of our Katamari, and if we let him down, he is quick to show his disappointment in us. Meanwhile, we follow the misadventures of a Japanese family. This family features a mom and two kids, trying to meet up with their dad for some unexplained reason. And the whole time, the kids notice that something is up in the background as they notice the prince rolling up a Katamari and causing havoc. However, every time the kids try to alert their mom about it, she just shrugs them off. Also, for some inexplicable reason, this family seems to be tied to the cosmos, but we'll get into that. This game uses tank controls, using both control sticks for movement. and overall I feel like there might be a bit of a learning curve for a first time player. But you should be up and running in no time. Basically, you approach any item, and if you can roll it up, it will attach to your Katamari. If you can't, the object might push you away, or cause other objects to fall off your Katamari. The initial difficulty in this game isn't too demanding, at least not for me, and while you can turn your brain off and just go with the flow, as you progress you might be met with a level or two that you might have to redo. This is because at its core, Katamari is a game about momentum, and finding the most efficient way to do things. The difference between a good run and a bad run in level might be determined by a moment of sheer bad luck, or a lack of oversight on the player's part. Because the map has elements that constantly move, you might run into some at just the right time, and be able to keep your momentum going. Similarly, if your Katamari's size is in an awkward spot, you might just find yourself being bumped around, or unable to fit between two objects. There are a lot of times where the game has wacky geometry. If items fall off your Katamari, you may not always get them back. Often an item might simply just fall into the ground, and disappear into the void. Despite that, Katamari may well have been a technical marvel of its time. It was released on the PS2, and while not overly impressive in terms of visuals, the scaling tricks this game does make transitioning from one size Katamari to the next feel pretty good. Maybe not seamless, because you can always tell when your Katamari is being upgraded, but it feels rewarding for sure. At a certain point, once your Katamari becomes bigger, people, and to a lesser extent objects, just start running away from you because they don't want to be rolled up into the Katamari. At the end of it all, our dad has us rolling out the entire planet, and even galaxies, as we do one last hurrah and roll up the universe. So what became of all those people we rolled up? Whatever happened to that Japanese doll family? Did all those people die? Do I really know all the answers? Maybe. It's hard to say. This isn't the last game in the Katamari series, after all. Remember that family from earlier? Well, it turns out that they can somehow breathe in space, so they're doing just fine. Instead of worrying how they'll get back to their daily lives, they decide to take a family out into space, as one does. So in conclusion, what was this all about again? Well, the thing is, people try to attach meaning to games. People try to attach meaning to a lot of things, in fact. And let me tell you, it doesn't need it. You don't need it, you don't need this. Katamari is about the vibe. It's about the music. It's about the aesthetic. There's a whole thing it does to your brain that is kind of hard for me to describe, but let me try anyway. Basically, it keeps my brain entertained, and I like how the moving colors look. The music is catchy, and the gameplay is entertaining enough to keep me going, while I unwind for a bit and roll around. It just feels good, you know? Shit, Katamari might be good for your health. In the end, there is no point in doing anything. We're all just floating out here in space. Kinda like this Katamari, that we're about to send off to space. And that's alright. Meaning exists where we find it. And personally, I find enjoyment in the Katamari franchise. Earlier, we talked a bit about Katamari being defined as eye candy, which is something that is entertaining but intellectually simple. But that's not a slight of the Katamari series. No, far from it. Katamari is a type of game that doesn't really have a lot of important things to say. But what it does say is fun and full of personality. Personally, I love games like this, where I can just shut my brain off, forget about all my worries, and just have a good time. To quote Candice Shane in her article, Gaming, this strange zen of Katamari Damacy. Perhaps that's what Keita Takahashi wanted all along. He wanted us to forget our troubles for about 5 to 8 minutes at a time, and just roll of it. Besides, nobody could ever be as disappointed of you as the king of all cosmos is. And maybe that's for the best. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to stay up to date on all of my latest releases. Check out my Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/AlejandroidSC. And last but not least, if you want to see a video essay that goes into how Katamari is not the game it seems on the outside, it's actually about consumer culture, consider checking out The Dark Heart of Katamari Damacy. Link in the description.